Hello, my name is Esther Deans and I've been working on equality issues in education in Bristol. Despite my many roles, I'm foremost a teacher, so I do know that teachers are some of the most amazing people who make changes in people's lives every day. So let me start by asking you, how are you? Take a moment to think about that. The impact of COVID-19 had a profound effect on us. We were going about our busy lives when suddenly we stopped. Our lives changed, our thoughts changed, our priorities changed. More time to think, appreciation of smaller things like going out. Friends became entertainers, sending all manner of social media posts. But there was one post that was to become a pivotal point during this period, and that was the image of the death of George Floyd. So why did George Floyd's death matter so much? Well, it underpinned the racial injustice that seemed to be going on all around us. Reports of more deaths amongst BAME staff to the NHS, greater risk of COVID-19 to BAME communities, predictions that BAME students would fare worse in working from home and in teacher-assessed grading of GCSEs and A-levels were matters of discussion. Preluded by the Amy Cooper video, in which the issue of white privilege was addressed just a week earlier, in the way she used the colour of a black man against him when talking to the police, the video of George Floyd forced us to address the undeniable issue of racial injustice that was beyond any other explanation. George Floyd was not the first and is already not the last to die due to the racial injustice that exists. But hearing him pleading for his life, "I can't breathe," became embedded in our hearts and sparked such hurt and outrage that people all around the world rose up to join the Black Lives Matter protest and give rise to a climate of change. This did not mean that all lives don't matter. It was simply acknowledging that when it came to racial injustice in the world, the scales were not evenly balanced. If you were black, you carry the weight of more obstacles and challenges, and we could no longer pretend that this was not the case. It was a cry of Black Lives Matter too. These protests were attended by people of every race and colour, not just something black people were calling for, but a much more united response. And this is good that this change is something that we all want to make together. In the same way the call for equality went around the world in the 1960s, with the protests in South Africa after the imprisonment of Nelson Mandela in 1962, the Civil Rights Act in America of 1964, and the UK Race Relations Act of 1965, to name just a few, we are now also facing a watershed moment. We have schools in Bristol where over half the students, black and white, have called for curriculum reform. Teachers asking what we can do differently. Education's on everyone's lips. And we know that change must come in education if we are serious about addressing the racial inequalities we see in our society. So what does this mean in education? This is not a new issue. We have been looking in Bristol at the impact of race in education for some time. We believe we live in a civilised, tolerant, fair society. But is this reflected in the very institutions that lie at the heart of the citizens we produce? Does race equality exist in education? There were 5 main areas that we focused on. 1, the whiteness of the curriculum and engagement of black students. 2, the lack of diversity of teaching staff and school leadership. 3, the lack of engagement with parents. 4, the rise in exclusions for black boys. And 5, the widening of the attainment gap between black and white students. The Runnymede Trust report of 2017 called Bristol a city divided and called out 3 main issues that impact on the lives of BME groups. 1 was the whiteness of the curriculum. Too often our school quota of black history starts with slavery and ends with civil rights, none of which puts black people in a particularly good light. As a Jamaican woman, I am denied the kudos that comes from all the great contributions of black people to our shared history. Maths, medicine, science, musicians, engineers, their achievements lost or denied through our current curriculum. This not only denies our black students the self-esteem and aspirations of walking with such ancestors, but it also consolidates a collective conscious bias towards a system that promotes being white with being superior, because those European figures are shown in a much more positive light. And therefore, according to the Runnymede Trust report, it concluded the current curriculum is drawn up by people who are not able to create a learning framework which caters for children from different upbringings and cultures, and therefore favours children from a white, mainly middle-class background. 2. Lack of diversity in teaching staff and school leadership. In Bristol, around 4.4% of our teachers are from BME backgrounds, compared with a national average of 7.5%. While we have a change in demography of students, our demographic of teaching staff has mainly remained the same. Research shows that diverse staffing is better for all pupils, with an increase in black teachers especially influential for black students, who, according to our figures, are in one of our most vulnerable groups. Black students spoke of the lack of black teachers impacting on role models in schools and their aspirations to teach. You can't be what you can't see. We know that diverse teams are good for creating more new ideas as you allow for more perspectives, yet this is not happening at the teaching level, the leadership level, or the governing board level. Change is possible. Brent actively recruited more black teachers and supported their progress. There are models to follow if we want to make something happen. 3. Poor engagement with parents. A link was drawn between low attainment and poor engagement with parents. Those least likely to complain or know the school system were often left out of the process by which they could provide further support to help their children progress. There seemed little impetus to empower parents to see themselves as part of the process or of educating their children. This is very different to elsewhere in the education system, where we see high achieving schools having high contact and information sharing with parents. Data collection models also added the widening of the attainment gap. Too often, the rosy picture presented of black students making great levels of progress as they outperform their target grades disguised the trend data that in reality they don't perform at the same level as their white counterparts. This is often as a result of low predicted grades given by their teachers, often away from primary school, that can follow a child throughout their school life, influencing their target grades and the grades teachers will push them to achieve. And this has a much wider and darker effect of influencing their choices, next steps, and life choices as those students will make. Spotlighted this year, it was acknowledged that teacher-assessed grades replacing exams may affect these disadvantaged groups the most. Of course, the true extent of that analysis will not come out until October, when final grades will be verified. 5. The rise in exclusion rates for black boys, 4 times higher than their white counterparts, despite the smaller percentage of them at most schools. These students are more likely to end up in pupil referral units, where they are less likely to be re-engaged with the curriculum, more likely to fall out of the education system, or achieve the kind of qualifications needed to equip them for life after school. We wonder why they have become disengaged with an education system they may feel is against them or has failed them. This again will have knock-on effects in terms of employment, as unemployment remains higher amongst the BME community than their white counterparts. So, if education is a preparation for life, how well are we preparing our students? If we say we want to live in a fair and just society, what are we prepared to do to change the status quo and make a difference? What do we want from our schools that will make transformational change that will give us greater hope for the future? And how can we use Black Lives Matter conversations as a way of healing and bringing us together, rather than creating more diversiveness and disruption? In Bristol, we've been creating the One Bristol curriculum as a way of making transformational change. Addressing BLM conversations and the most common concerns of the Race Equality in Education group, it enables schools to address this in a positive way. Rather than just tinkering at the edges of education and adding a bit more black history here and there, we wanted to ask ourselves what we needed from schools in order to make transformational change that will actually make a difference to the society we live in. Therefore, we are asking our schools to sign up to a commitment of inclusion and diversity. In the first phase, we will address the issue of race equality in the curriculum, and this will lay a template for change for Bristol City Council that will allow them to address other issues in other phases. We are asking schools to focus on 5 main strands to make change. 1. The curriculum. Teachers have been working on new curriculum resources that bring in Black contributions to life in Britain throughout the curriculum, not just history, but for all ages, stages and subjects. This will normalise this information so that when looking at the Tudors, it becomes normal to look not just at the lives of rich and poor Tudors, but also Black Tudors. Black soldiers who fought in World War One and Two will finally be recognised, and children will be able to see the medical ideas that came from Africa as well as our numbers and maths. This will not only raise the self-esteem of Black students as they see themselves within the curriculum and create a sense of belonging, but also allow white students to benefit by breaking down stereotypes and promoting a greater sense of equality and respect for their peers. This is not intended to be additional material, but rather lessons and schemes of learning rejigged to allow for this to be an integral part of learning, and resources easily available for teachers to be able to use them. A diverse curriculum is good for all students in building critical awareness skills and creating global citizens. Instead of talking about what was the British Empire, we might ask, how far was the British Empire a force for good or bad in the world? 2. Enrichment, wider participation. One Bristol curriculum has worked with local artists and creative groups to bring a wider variety of workshops into the classroom. This might range from an interactive play on the Windrush by the West Indian elders, Cargo Black history stories through poetry, or Mama Africa project on African history with a drum and dancing workshop for a performance for parents. Working with people from the Black community allows students to break down stereotypes and barriers. In my old school in South Bristol, it was amazing how a Caribbean night or having gospel singers from America made more a difference than any amount of traditional educating. Schools will get a recommended list of community groups to choose from so they know they are getting a quality product. 3. CPD. Support for teachers to not only teach a new and different curriculum, but also address some of the issues around teaching in a multicultural school and dealing with a range of different cultures. Black students often report feeling that they're treated differently, and while this might not be done on purpose, and we've heard lots about unconscious bias, it is something we need to address. In Jamaican cultures, it's seen as a sign of respect not to look an elder in the eye, but that might not be understood if a child doesn't look at you in the eye when you're talking to them. And Jamaicans may often be loud and animated quite normally when they're talking, yet this could be interpreted as being loud and aggressive. A sense of cultural awareness could be helpful in understanding the students that you teach, and a good step forwards for students and community to learn together to make things better for the future, and a step forward in working with parents, community and reducing exclusions. 4. Recruitment and retention of BAME teachers and support for leadership pathways. Research has shown that Black children who have Black teachers tend to do better, and we know that diverse teams can be more effective due to the greater range of ideas, which benefits all pupils and the whole school. More Black teachers and leaders will serve as good role models and lead to further increase in BAME teachers to at least reflect the multiple society they serve. 5. The environment. Ensuring that the environment our young people grow up in reflects the kind of society we want for our children to grow up in, one that reflects equality, diversity, inclusion and achievement by all. This will be reflected in the imagery around them, the staff around them, and the ethos around them, and the sense that they all belong and are accepted. So should we be hopeful for the future? Yes, we should always be hopeful for the future, because this is something that we have the power to change and we can do together. Coronavirus gave us time to think, reflect, make changes to our lives that we never expected to, behave in ways that we never did before, and those changes very quickly began to feel normal, or should I say a new normal. So why shouldn't it be like this for other areas of our lives where we're now reflecting on what we could do better? The Bible tells us to love our neighbour as you love yourself. Mark 12:31. It is one of the greatest commandments. Changes brought about by the coronavirus often brought out some of the best in people. Can we do the same again for race equality issues and change what we do today to get a better tomorrow? Changing hearts and minds to create an equal society we can be proud of? Yes, we can. So how are you feeling today? Are you refreshed and ready to make a difference? Here are some key questions to think about. What kind of society do you want for ourselves and our next generation? Do you believe that change is necessary, possible, or achievable? How far do you agree with One Bristol curriculum approach, or what would you do differently? And what role can churches and Christian organisations play to support schools in all of this? Thank you very much for listening.